this video, we're going to explore a few different techniques to paint copper non-metallic metal. Now, I know non-metallic techniques tend to generate a lot of strong opinions one way or the other. For me, non-metallic is it's what I grew up with, literally. My training is as a watercolor painter, pastel artist, oil painter. There aren't any metallic paints there, so I always was working with non-metallic, and that just translated to the miniatures. So here I've got a few Raging Heroes miniatures. Obviously, really nice dark elf character. We've got a nice shield, weapon, some armor, and you can see we've got some of that Verdigris technique. That sort of staining of the copper. I'll do a little bit on the flesh tones to show you how that and the hair can complement what you've done on your metals. Some of the colors that we're going to use over here on the dark end of the spectrum. Got this from Reaper Miniatures. It's called Brown Liner. This is a very nice, deep, dark, rich paint, but it's thinner than a lot of your standard paint. It's not all runny, say like a wash or an ink, but it gets the job done when you need some nice deep darks. There's some deep twilight that we're especially going to use on the flesh tone. A few of our copper colors here. This parasite brown, some brown rose, also from Vallejo, back to Reaper with some maiden flesh. We have some of our colors for our Verdigris technique. We have emerald green, green sky, and Verdigris. Last couple of colors from Vallejo also is ice yellow and deep yellow. That will be for some more of this, maybe a little bit of a brassy type color here on the weapon. You might also see out on the palette a couple of extra mediums here. From Vallejo, we have glaze medium. This is nice to keep your paints not only wet on the palette, but also on the miniature if you want to do some wet blending. Flow Improver, this is from Reaper. This is nice to use instead of water to thin down your paints. You get fewer watermarks. It tends not to break down the chemical composition of your paint quite as much as water does. So you might see these two also out on the palette. Before we get started with the miniature, I just wanted to take some of our colors and do a few little exercises on this piece of board here. Show a few of the principles of just non-metallics in general so that we can apply them to this process of making copper. So what I want to do is sort of set the stage. Right here we're going to do a little bit of the copper. So here is it's a little bit of a darker. So yeah, I took the deep twilight and some of the parasite brown. So this just going to put a few kind of simulate some of the armor pieces here. Let's do something like this. So that would be, it's going to be kind of your shadow side. So we need to do our light side. So I took some of the brown rose, some of the parasite brown, left some of the original paint in the brush. So this is essentially kind of your first layers here. So I'm going to take some of the brown rose. So this gets almost a little more pinkish. A little more of the maiden flesh. As you can see, we're starting to distinguish some of the different sections of the armor plate there. Take a little bit of the ice yellow. Start to work this edge a bit. You can see how I'm leaving these different colors out on the palette. They're still wet enough for me to see, for me to work with. So I can kind of go back and forth if I need to. You can see I'm starting to focus on this edge here. And you can focus on that even more. Like so. And now I'm going to go back to my darks here. I'm going to grab some of the there we go. Some of that parasite brown. And put in some reflected light. I'll do a little more of that. Back to that purple. So what I'm going to do now, just to kind of provide you with even a little more context, I'm going to throw some shadow around the outside of our armor here and show you just how that starts to look. Because I also want you to see the reflected light. So all of a sudden you can see just how we've There's some nice context for everything here. So let's grab a little bit of the purple here. And get a little bit of a shadow there. Same thing along this edge. As you can see here, along the leg. Need a little bit of shadow under here. Maybe boost the reflected light just a little bit here. And kind of a final so with that, well, we're going to need some verdigris, and that's how I'm going to bring out a little bit of the emerald here. You can see how that works just a little bit. The emerald is kind of intense, a little bit goes a long way. So mixing that with a little bit of the green sky, and that's going to go into your crevices. So a little bit like this again into the crevices here. This kind of gives you that kind of tarnished copper. And you can make it the lighter, more intense in the where your lights are here. And it's just a quick little exercise that you can kind of refer back to every now and then. This whole principle of the reflected light is very important. Always want to make sure you have some reflected light in your shadows, just like we had here. So armed with this, kind of shows very briefly how the verdigris works and the general principles of reflected light and your highlights. I think we might even take some of the white verdigris and make even brighter highlights. With all of the shaded base coat complete on the figure, means we've established our light and dark patterns in general, and now we want to really reinforce the darks everywhere, putting in more shadows in all of these dark recesses and even do some tinting. As you can see, we've made this a little more green than it is here. And to do that, we've got some colors out on the palette. In the back row, we've got some brown liner from Reaper. Again, that's a really deep, rich dark. Have some secret weapon washes here. The baby poop is something that we're going to use on the brassy stuff here. We have the algae and cool gray. I use on the blade and on the shadow portions of the hair. Some amethyst for the flesh tone. Some black shade that we're going to probably throw into each of these to get the deepest darks. And a few additional washes here from GW. The Reichland Flesh Shade, Agrax Earth Shade. Use some of those on the actual copper bits here. And again, still probably going to mix in some of the baby poop here and there. Probably brown liner to really get the deep darks. So let's put these colors out on the palette and let's play around with them. I have the washes out here on the palette. Now what I want to do just briefly is explain what I mean glaze versus wash versus tint. I guess one of the easiest ways to see that is I'm going to throw some glazes on the hair. You can see I'm already using a liner brush. That's so that I can maintain control as much as possible. And you can see it's not a whole bunch of pigment in the brush at any one time either. You can even water it down a little bit, because you have to think of this, if I want some really deep darks here, instead of going to the black right away and go into the dark, work your way gradually, just the way you would work towards your lights, layer by layer. You wouldn't just start throwing out white. So what I'm going to do is, and with the liner brush, I'm going to start it from where the headdress is, and sort of carrying it along the line of the hair. Start here where this headdress is, and pull it out, and letting gravity do some work for me. But preserving the light colors as much as possible. So I have to put those back in. I'm going to work down towards this shadowy seam. I'm just going to leave this alone. I'm just going to work in this section over here. It's another thing when you're doing glazes on a big section like this, you have to break it down into smaller parts. See, I'm just kind of focused in on this area. Now what I'm going to do is have a slightly darker version of this, and yes, you can mix your wash colors together. So you can see how it's going to pool, but not too much in that area. And again, it's not going to pool too much because we're just using this little liner brush. If I had used a much bigger brush and had a ton of the wash in the brush, it would have been much harder to do what we just did. It would have been a lot harder to control that. And also, you can use your finger to wipe away excess if you feel the need. Now I'm gonna move over to the next section of the hair. Kind of using gravity, working my way down from the top of the head. Work my way down. knowing that in places it'll be darker. There'll probably be a second, third, or maybe even a fourth layer of tinting that's going to happen here. Now behind the shield, if you remember, we wanted this to be a bit darker. So I'm actually taking some of the amethyst, mixing that in, and applying it right here behind that shield to kind of reinforce the fact that I want it darker. So I'm going to kind of spin this around so that I can get to the hair. So once more, you're going to see. So it's dark here, and I pull it out. I start here, kind of letting gravity do its thing. I'm going to leave this alone for right now because I want that to dry. And again, you can pull away any excess if you feel the need to make it a little lighter if you're losing your highlights. So right here, it's another one of those sections where it's a tiny bit darker. There's a shadow area right here down by the neck, like that. Go back to the hair. Like that, down into that shadow area, just like we did on the other one. And this is sort of the principles of glazing. I thought this would be kind of a easier introduction for you to see this. Some of the other areas of glazing might be a tiny bit more complicated. Last but not least, we want to do our verdigris effect on the copper. That's all of this kind of greenish corroded effect. For that, we put a few things out on the palette. We've got the Vallejo Emerald and some of the Flow Improver. You can see what the Flow Improver will do. It thins this down very nicely, but again, it won't leave the watermarks. I don't know what it is, but that's what I like about the Flow Improver, is it helps you avoid those watermarks. Now I still have some of my algae wash out here. I want to start out a little bit darker. Now the reason why the Flow Improver is out is because the verdigris technique actually starts out as a bit of a wash. Really more of a glaze because it's very controlled. So what I'm going to do is start kind of on the back side here because there's a lot of shadow, and hopefully you can see what was just done here. See how I picked just that top area to do a little bit of it down in the shield. Again, think of it as more of a glaze or a wash. So I let that kind of sink down into crevices. Let's turn this around the other way. And on this side of the shield, same thing. And by treating this as more as a glaze, now really, where's it going to be more corroded? It's going to corrode where water is going to coagulate, and that is going to be where the water coagulates as we do some of these washes here. So it's advantageous to have the flow improver in the paint and make it nice and watery. It's important though not to get too crazy. See how I remove to pull those rivets out, let the recesses around the rivets catch that verdigris. On the shoulder armor, the same thing. On the headdress, have to be careful on the headdress because if it gets too green, then it's just going to blend right into the hair. So at this point, it's all about these recesses. So I left that alone because if I wipe all of this out, there will be no contrast, nothing interesting to look at. So this is going to carry down onto that shoulder pad across the chest here, down through the armor. Which is why in some cases I didn't do too much with my lights because I had to say, well, what's this color gonna do when I do this verdigris thing? How is that gonna affect everything else that comes afterwards? So same thing on this section, like we did in our example, focusing more in where the joints are. Trying to make sure to leave enough of that copper color showing. Again, focusing on the recesses where necessary, dipping into flow improver to make sure that it's watery enough. So, because if it's watery enough, it'll stay in those recesses where we really want it to be. That's really, it's our target area for it. You can also see that the verdigris color is it's slightly different from the hair color. That's why we've used, in some cases, some of the yellow or even the maiden flesh to highlight some of the hair. So the hair is more grayed down, the emerald, more intense. So this way the effect shows up a little more. It can be a tricky balance though, because I don't want to destroy all of the dark colors here. If I do that, then these aren't going to have any shape. So this may require a little bit of practice. Maybe you try this on a type of miniature that has less complicated armor.